Welcome to the Mobile UA Show. Today's episode is a part of our series Intelligent Artifice, a deep dive on how AI is transforming performance marketing. Since 2018 and over 250 plus episodes, we've been deconstructing how the best performance marketers actually win. Every week, I sit down with the operators shaping it, or we tear apart the ad systems behind the highest performing advertisers in the world. I'm Shamant Rao, founder of Rocketship HQ. Let's get into it. Our guest today is David Barnard, developer advocate at RevenueCat and host of the Sub Club podcast. David is also an indie app developer who has launched over 30 apps, sold 4, and seen every major shift in the App Store since day one. He was also a guest on our podcast in an earlier episode called A Brief History of App Store Monetization, which is very instructive and goes through all of the changes and evolutions in the App Store since day one. In today's conversation, David talks about what's new and what's the latest and greatest on the App Store. As we all know, that is AI. David talks about his own experience building a new app entirely by himself, without contractors, without coding partners, just Claude Code, Codex, and most important of all, decades of product intuition. Today's conversation goes deep on what's actually changed, what actually requires human judgment, and everything that David has learned in the decades of shipping without AI and the months of shipping with it. Let's get into it. I'm excited to welcome David Barnard to Intelligent Artifice. David, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's looking forward to chatting.
You interviewed me on the Sub Club podcast a while ago, and you are quite prolific on the podcast, on Twitter, and building your own apps while managing a family and travel, as you were just talking about before we hit record. So I'm always in awe of what you do. I'm always impressed. And the last time we spoke, when I interviewed you, we did an episode called A Brief History of App Store Monetization. And we did that because you've seen the app stores since the app stores launched in 2008, and you've seen every major shift firsthand. So for folks that may not be familiar, can you talk about what that journey has looked like?
Sure. So I was a huge Mac nerd. That's really where it all started. And I was working in a recording studio and got familiar with the Mac because of that, and then bought my own Mac in the early 2000s. And so I was reading Mac Rumors and all the old Mac enthusiast sites. I was probably reading Daring Fireball when it first launched. And so when the rumors of the iPhone started circulating, I was super excited. I bought the stupid Motorola Rocker iTunes phone that they released before. It was a total flop. I actually returned it. It was terrible. And then when the iPhone came out, I was in line and first person in San Antonio, Texas. I got my picture in the paper. I was one of the first people to get the iPhone in San Antonio. And so immediately after getting the iPhone, I was just awestruck. And it really felt to me like this is the future. And it sounds fun things. You're like, oh yeah, I called that before it was real or whatever. And you want to think you're really smart or whatever. But genuinely, when I first started using the iPhone, and then especially when I saw my dad first using the iPhone, he struggled with computers as he transitioned into using them in the 90s in his business. And this was now 2007. He had always struggled with computers, and he took to the iPhone like a duck to water. And that, combined with my own experience, left a massive impression on me. This is the future of computing. This is the future of smartphones. And so I dove headfirst. As soon as rumors were circulating that there'd be an SDK, I started making business plans and brainstorming apps I could build. I jailbroke an early iPhone so that I could load third-party apps. I actually bought a separate iPhone because I was worried about jailbreaking my real iPhone. Bought a second iPhone, jailbroke it, started installing those early third-party apps to understand what was going on. And then had an app in the App Store. I should have had it day one, but Apple didn't approve my developer account in time. So yeah, I've been building apps since the very beginning, and I'm not a coder. I tried to learn how to code, and I got about a month in, and I realized it would take years to get good at coding. I didn't have years. I wanted an app on the App Store day one. And so I hired a contractor to do the coding and never looked back. The one thing that has benefited me a lot over the years is that I'm pretty hands-on. So I'll read API docs. And because I spent a couple of months trying to learn to code, it's like I got the fundamentals enough to where for these last 18 years, I can grasp what's going on and understand the APIs and look at WWDC diffs on what's changed and look for opportunities and stuff. So for the past 18 years, I've been building apps with a combination of partners and contractors. I've launched, 30 something apps. I've sold 4 different apps. I've had multiple apps make over $1 million. Been a crazy 18-year path. And then to be real frank, I did go through a pretty slow spot back in 2018-ish. One of my business partners moved on to another job. And so the revenue started going down. And that's when I started looking for a side gig. And the side gig that landed was RevenueCat as a developer advocate there. And that was 6 years ago that I joined RevenueCat. And I joined part-time. And then 2 years in, I was doing so much for the company and was going through the process of building a house. And it's just so much easier as an employee to get a loan. And then I help care for my 4 kids and all that stuff. So I finally joined full time after 2 years but kept building apps on the side. So I have a weather app that I've been tinkering with. And then I think as we're going to discuss, I just recently started vibe coding my own app and it's pretty exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. That's quite a journey. And I know we talked about some bits of it when we last spoke. And I also did find an old newspaper article about you standing in line waiting for the first iPhone when I was preparing for this. It's kind of crazy. Yeah, as you said, we're going to talk about what you actually built vibe coding versus what you built with contractors in the past. So talk to me about the app that you're building right now. You said when we were preparing for this that you had the idea a couple of years ago. What stopped you from building it back then? How have things changed now?
Yeah, I actually had the idea maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I won't get into the exact idea. It's funny because for years, people would say, it's not the idea, it's execution. Like you shouldn't be precious about not sharing the idea. But I think the last year has really flipped that on the head that, people can build apps so quickly that if you do have a good idea for an app with a unique angle or whatever, and you do build, I think it's the worst time ever to fully build in public. Once the app is out there, I'm going to share it and talk about it more publicly. But anyways, the app idea was like 5 years ago. I'll say it's essentially a self-improvement app. And I was building it for my son. And initially it was like just a paper version that I was working with him. And 5 years ago, I thought, this would make a really cool app. But the amount of effort and money it would take to pull off an app 5 years ago, and pretty much any time up until the last 12 to 18 months, it would have cost 30 to 50,000, maybe 20 if I did a overseas contractor on the low end. But then it's so much more work managing that kind of person. If I went in the US or Western Europe or whatever, and work with somebody more experienced, more senior, it would have easily cost $50,000 to $100,000. And it's an idea. I think it's really fun, but I have no idea how well it's going to perform financially. And it wasn't the kind of idea like this is a slam dunk. Let me convince somebody to partner with me and we'll build this together. I didn't want to waste their time. I didn't want to waste my time, but I always wanted to bring it to the world. And that's what's so cool about vibe coding and the changes that have happened over the last 12 to 18 months is that, with very little expense. I'm spending $300 a month now, combining $100 for Claude Max, $200 for ChatGPT Pro, and I'm using my personal accounts. I do have access to those via RevenueCat, but we do have an internal policy, of course, as we should, that you don't burn company tokens on personal projects. For that out of my own pocket as I explore this. But other than that, $300 and a few hours here and there, nights and weekends, it's not really costing me anything. And so I'm going to be able to put this idea out into the world and see how it does. Maybe it makes a few $1,000s, and that's more than enough to compensate me for the time and maybe, go toward a nice little vacation for me and the family. And that's just never been possible before. So it's pretty exciting to be able to do that.
Yeah, you're right. Really how cheap and easy it is to put some of this out into the world. I used to work with developers a couple of years ago, and it always felt uphill. Also, as somebody that wasn't as tech savvy, and I don't consider myself technical, it always went uphill. And just, of course, now with Claude Code and Codex, it's just become crazy right now. I'm curious, you talked about how you've been building all of this yourself. I'm curious if you can think of the moment when you realized you could actually build a lot of this yourself. Was there a point of time or moment when you had realized, oh my goodness, I can just do this myself?
Yeah, the moment was probably seeing my boss, Rick, vibe code an app over, I think he did it over the holidays and launched it in January. It was really impressive. And I think he actually shared with me the Manus conversation, or maybe screenshotted parts of it, of what it took to actually build. And just seeing him do it with this very natural language conversation, I was like, okay, like something's changed. This is working in a way that it never has before, because if you go back even 9 months ago, it's really more experienced coders who were able to move quickly with these vibe coding tools. And I had experimented with Replit, I experimented with some of the others, and it was just so rudimentary what it would build that it wasn't interesting to me. And it always felt like, oh, I'm going to need to dig into the code. I'm going to need to hire somebody to dig into the code. There's no way I could ship an app at the quality level that I would want to build without some amount of tinkering in the code. But when I saw, all of this like natural language stuff, now Rick is pretty technical, so he may have tinkered a little bit here and there. He actually studied design, so it was super impressive, the design of the app. And it was like, and Rick's just an incredibly talented, intelligent person. But it was just a wake-up call that he could do that mostly just natural language and ship a pretty complete 1.0 with all sorts of features and stuff. The vibes around the industry, I think, also influenced me to finally try it. People talking about how good it was, and I was like, all right, I got to actually try it. And I will say, a friend of mine, Justin, he's actually a developer I built, launched in a pro with. We still have lunch every once in a while and went to open claw meetups in the last few months and stuff like that. And it really feels like he's been 3 to 6 months ahead of seeing around the corner of what's going to happen with these things. And right before I started, we had lunch and he told me, we're moving to a place where I don't think I'm going to ever read a line of code again. And when he said that, I thought, no way. And I still have my doubts. When you get into big, complex code bases and like sophisticated backends and like complex data schemas and things like that, there's the expertise of a senior programmer is still going to be incredibly valuable moving forward to manage those complexities, even with AI. I could be wrong, because he was telling me he thinks we're moving to a place where AI is going to be way better at setting up a database, managing migrations, all that kind of stuff. And so combined with everything I'd seen with Rick, the vibes in the industry, and him saying that, I was like, oh, I got to just pull the Band-Aid off and make some time.
Yeah.
And it's tough with 4 kids and a demanding job. And I will say it's a little addicting. And there's been nights where I wrap up my RevenueCat work and dive into vibe coding, and my wife has to pry me away from the computer. It's tough, but it's been so much fun building it.
I like that you use the word addictive, and I would actually echo that from my experience. I was actually chatting with somebody that it's perhaps for the first time in history that you have something being addictive that's actually building stuff, making stuff. It is normally a lot of stuff that you would consider addictive would be alcohol or whatnot. But for the first time, you actually make stuff, and it's actually addictive because it gives you that dopamine rush. A lot of it's just from having that instant feedback loop, which again, I still can't believe as a lifelong non-programmer have multiple attempts to learn code and just have a degree in engineering, but just never ended up learning to code. And it's just incredible what we are all able to do now. And I know you spoke briefly in this conversation about you were reading API documents. You were getting into the Mac ecosystem back in 2008, 2009. Unlike completely non-technical people, you had a technical background. How does that translate into your vibe coding experience? Do you feel like you have a better sense of what's going on? Talk to me about that.
Yeah, I do think that as the tools stand today, it's pretty good at engineering. It feels more junior than the most junior developer I've ever worked with. I'll set it off on a task like, hey, animate this. And then, some animations are something that it really struggles with, because it's not like taking a screen capture of the simulator to watch the animation happen and introspect the animation. That might not be too far away.
Yeah.
So from a development standpoint, it's been as fun as it's been. There's also been very frustrating moments where it takes 3 different prompts to solve one small bug. And actually, I've been bouncing back and forth between Claude Code and Codex, playing them off each other a little bit. I don't know if
Yeah.
that brings out the best in them or the worst in them, or if I'm doing the right thing or not. But
Yeah.
if Claude Code doesn't nail something in 1 or 2 iterations, I take it into Codex and explain what we've been working on. And I have found Codex as of today, everything we talk about in some ways is going to be outdated even by the time this is released. But as of today, Codex is better at iOS apps. OpenAI created a plugin for building iOS apps. And there's so much to harness engineering these days that a lot of the credit goes to the models improving over like December, January timeframe for things getting so good. But it actually has a lot to do with the harness engineering where they've given it more tools, more context, more skills internally in Codex, in Claude Code to be able to execute on these things. And so Codex, with this iOS development skill or plugin, does feel like a more senior programmer than Claude Code and can figure out the more complex code and bugs. Claude Code still feels a little more creative and better at some of the more product managery kind of things. But I think that's where things really still fail today, is that I have noticed that it takes a lot of kind of product intuition, and you have to really know what to build and why to build it and how to do things to build a really great app. Admittedly, I have not tried Lovable and Rourke and some of these others where you should theoretically be able to more one-shot apps. And maybe they have some skills and some is set up and the tooling has some better kind of product management intuition. But so far with Claude Code and Codex, it does feel like I lean very heavily on those like 18 years of experience where it'll tell me, oh, I can't do this. I'm like, no, you can. I've read the SDK doc, like you could do that.
Yeah.
There is a lot of kind of fighting with it and using that background that I have in order to build something truly great. So I'm not sure about one-shotting, and I'm just really not sure where this all goes from here. And part of me thinks as much progress as we've seen, even in the past 3 months, maybe ChatGPT or Codex and OpenAI need a product management skill where they, code a lot of the kind of intuition that a product manager would have the same way they've done with coding. But I'm not convinced this is where AI does generally fall flat, is in the kind of the creativity and the knowing what to do. It's way better at just following instructions and repeating patterns from the past, not like creating new things. So it may be a while before we can one-shot apps. And I hear a lot of hype about the end of software, and maybe we could dig more into that. But at a really high level, I think it's going to be a long time, if ever, that something like Strava or Ladder or Duolingo or something like that is going to be something a non-technical, non-product person can just vibe code at Duolingo. Maybe it'll get good enough where it can just copy Duolingo, but then what's the like Duolingo? And then there's so much. And this is where, again, maybe this is coming because if a bot farm with a bunch of iPhones and then you just have the AI use a bunch of apps over and over again and understand the patterns and the animations and figure out what it feels like to use these apps and the product decisions that went into it, maybe it can start reverse engineering those kind of things better than it currently has. But I think it's going to be a while before you could really one-shot a more sophisticated app. But we'll see. Things are moving so quick. And then at the end of the day, and I talked to Eric Fupert about this on the podcast, is even if you can one-shot a clone of Duolingo, you need to get attention for it. Distribution then becomes and so we'll have a flood of apps, but the apps that have distribution and have network effects already have an audience will continue to thrive versus these vibe coded apps are going to put a huge dent in some of the.
Right. And there's just so much I want to dig into in what you said, but you're right. You could potentially one-shot copying Duolingo. It's probably theoretically possible. I've one-shotted simple apps. But what I also come to realize is this making this into something production ready, even just if it's just adding onboarding, setting up paywalls, takes so much longer, and it's a longer journey than just having something that lists on Xcode and in my simulator, and I can just run it and test file it. And I suddenly think about a lot of these systems will have product management intuition. From what you're saying, a lot of what you're building builds on your personal experience, personal intuition of knowing the API docs inside out. You know what's possible, what isn't, and you're able to push back. And normal non-programmer isn't really able to do that. They might be able to push back and say, try again or do this again. But without that kind of contextual nuance, it sounds like it's not really going to work. And I know you talked about your friend who said they're not going to review a line of code, read a line of code again. And you talked about how you were working with programmers in the past, contractors in the past. And in preparation for this call, you did mention that for the app that you just vibe coded and launched, you are planning to have a senior programmer review it. Talk to me about why you are considering that, given everything else we've been talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really waffling on this, so we'll see if I actually do it or not. I'm nervous that if I launch this app and it makes a few $1,000s and now I have subscribers and people are depending on it, and as I said, it's a self-improvement app, and the goal is to help people improve their lives. And if they get it out there and there's like a massive bug, and then I try and fix the bug and it breaks the database and the database migration doesn't work, and then it like kills everybody's data progress and things like that, then that would be just a terrible experience. And you to get really bad reviews on the App Store, probably get refund requests and things like that. And so I am a little nervous to put this thing out in the world with code that no experienced developer has ever looked at. But on the flip side, the deeper I get into this, and what my friend Justin was talking about is that we're getting close, and maybe for the level of simplicity that this app is, it's not a super complex, deep app. There's not a really complex data schema. It's pretty simple, straightforward things. What have you ever done in the history of software? A programmer writes the code and then they test it and see the output. And the code quality varies tremendously. I talk to any programmer who's worked at multiple companies and seen a lot of code, and they'll complain about code quality and poorly written code and poorly documented code and stuff like that. But poorly created code is like running important systems and like making money. And so there's part of me that does think that as good as AI is at the patterns of coding and looking for those kind of things, I bounce back and forth between Codex and Claude Code, asking it to check each other's work, doing deep QA passes and things like that, and asking it to like refactor and clean things up and look for dependencies that aren't used anymore and all those kinds of things. And again, a lot of that takes my intuition of having done QA on apps for 18 years. I would work with programmers on the code, but then I was the primary interface between the code being completed and then it being good enough to ship. And I got pretty good at breaking stuff. And if that's what for 18 years as the kind of QA person, and I even hired QA people at times, contract, if that was the last line of defense anyway, if that is still the last line of defense, then maybe it is good enough. I don't know. I'm going back and forth. I might at least just have somebody like peek at it. But I was talking to a programmer friend recently about that idea, and he was like, in an hour or two, programmers can be able to like really understand the code well enough to tell you whether it's good and maintainable. Or that's again where AI is like, you can point Codex at it and say, look for issues, look for bad patterns, look for all these kinds of things. And it can introspect I think I'm at like 10,000 lines of code now. It can look at all of that in a way and with speed that a human programmer can't. So yeah, I'm waffling on it. I don't know how valuable it would be to do it. And I don't know how much risk I'd be taking. And because this is a side project, there's a little bit of me that just wants to YOLO it out there of not worry too much. And I don't think this is going to make hundreds of thousands of dollars or anything. I'd be thrilled if it made $1,000, $2,000 a month. It would make a few $1,000s a month. Yeah. And so who knows? It could make, $3,000 a month. It could do better than I expect. You just don't know. And that's actually the fun and a little bit of the dopamine of doing this. I'm working on it. I go back and forth between, nobody's going to care and nobody wants this app, to, no, I see the App Store making $100,000 a month, that I think this is like a better app than that. We'll see how it turns out.
And you're right that, you could very much drop this into Codex or Claude Code or have them read the code base and say, do a QA pass, do a deep QA. And with your experience, you know exactly what to prompt them for, what to look for, probably do a lot of it themselves. I have considered, though, handing some of my code to an experienced programmer who would look at it with AI, someone like yourself that knows what API endpoints would be, what lies behind the scenes of the code. I haven't found somebody that is as tech savvy and AI savvy. Maybe that's something that I think could be valuable, but maybe not if, Claude Code and Codex are able to look at these directly as well. Yeah.
And then this is where the skills come in, where a good QA skill would encapsulate as much or more than an experienced programmer would think off the top of their head to ask the, in some ways, that's part of the power of this, is that even for those kind of code review thing, it can check on so many different levels that an experienced programmer wouldn't think to, or doesn't have the time to, or whatever.
And you could have the AI come up with a skill too, right? And something we've done is, so a lot of our business, we have about 30 to 40 different pieces of code running at any point of time. And just this weekend, I was like, oh, things are breaking. Can I have a fixing mechanism in the code where every time something breaks, activate a Claude Codex, and that goes in, it fixes it, alerts me, sends me a Slack update. And I was like, holy shit, it's actually fixing it fast. And that was like a Frankenstein moment for me. That's been incredible. Yeah. And with your own app that you're building, talk to me about how you're thinking about distribution. And I also asked that because you talked about the proliferation of apps that you've seen just with the advent of AI. Getting distribution from everything I see and understand is challenging. So how are you thinking about this for yourself?
Yeah. If you build it, they will come has just never been true on the App Store. I mean, there have been a few lucky people like the iBeer guy who, so early in the App Store, such a fun gimmick that it spread virally. But pretty much since the beginning of the App Store, very few apps has it actually been the case where like you just build something cool, tell a few people, and it takes on a life of its own. Pretty much always requires some amount of pushing the boulder uphill to get attention. And I will say sometimes part of it is just building something that will get attention. And so this is something I think a ton about in building this app specifically in my weather app, is that if you can do something interesting and innovative that at least buys you some reason for somebody to pause. Because like we were talking about earlier, if you clone Duolingo, what's the hook? Like, why will people care? Like, they can just use Duolingo and it's probably better and doesn't have bugs and is more complete. And even when we were talking about that, we didn't talk about how much of Duolingo lives on the server that can't just be copied. You can copy patterns, but it's not like you can just copy all of their lessons and skills and the AI behind it that's driving the lessons and understanding the user's skill level to move you forward or have you repeat lessons. Like, there's so much that goes into all of that. But so if you just clone something, like, why does it need to exist? What's the angle? And so that's what I've been thinking a lot about with this app. And in the self-improvement space, it's the kind of thing where people do want to. This is why health and fitness has been such a big category forever. That's why we're seeing a lot of in Headspace and Calm. And it's been one of the bigger categories, if you include all of that kind of in the kind of overall heading of self-improvement. It's been one of the biggest categories of the App Store for a long time. I would even lump Duolingo into that. Learning a language, that's a form of self-improvement. And so I think with this app, there's potential to be able to AI generate the kind of content. Now, I want to be careful to say I'm a little worried about where we're headed, where you get fake people doing fake testimonials in fake scenarios and things like that. So what I'm not going to do is go use the latest video model and create a bunch of fake testimonials of people saying, oh, I used this app and it saved my life. Instead, my goal with this and what I'm going to try, and may completely flop, we'll see, but it's to create more of that kind of motivational content that people do with on TikTok and Instagram and stuff, where the hook isn't as strong. So again, I'm not expecting to make hundreds of thousands of dollars. I'm not trying to like build a whole business around this, but I think I can create enough good content, little slideshows and things like that, that are motivational and get people excited about self-improvement and then see this app as a way to achieve that. I will say for a lot of apps, especially with organic, if you really do want to build a great business, not just get a little attention, make a few grand here and there, ideally the app like has a hook that's exciting and able to be demonstrated in a TikTok video. So I just had Coconut on the podcast. They built an app from scratch starting 2 years ago, got it to $6.7 million in ARR and sold it to Quizlet all in the past 2 years. It's a crazy story. But what that app does is it takes notes, it'll record lectures like at school and college and things like that, and then build flashcards and summarize and help you study based on the lecture. There were so many magic moments in that experience that they were able to create a lot of viral content that wasn't just, and the way they described it is like, you don't want to go viral as a toy, you want to go viral as a tool. And so is your tool exciting enough to get attention on its own the way Coconut did? And they even gave an example on the podcast of one of the things they went viral for was this brain rot feature where it would give you study notes while it had one of those Minecraft parkour or Subway Surfers videos going on. And that content went super viral. People thought, oh, this is so funny. I can study with brain rot. And those videos went super viral for them, but they didn't actually convert very well compared to the kind of content that positioned it more as a tool that's really going to solve a need. And so I think these are the things you need to be thinking about. This is just one, what I'm saying about building some motivational content or what Coconut is doing. That's just like the tip of the iceberg of the possibilities of getting attention for your app. If it's truly super innovative, you can get press. That's part of what I've done with my weather app. And I do have a big update to my weather app coming where we're doing something really unique and innovative in the weather space that I think people are going to be really excited about. Part of the strategy there is that because it's really unique and innovative, I think Apple is likely to feature it because it uses their technologies in an innovative way. And then I think I will be able to get some amount of press and broad attention for it because it does something unexpected and really innovative in a space where pretty much everybody looks at a weather app for. Not many people are going to pay for a third-party weather app because the native weather apps are so good, but it's such a large space. There's so many people and it's something everybody cares about. Then when you do something unique and innovative, you can get attention. So press is a way to get attention. There's a lot of apps where the value prop is so strong that you can do profitable ads. So if you have a really strong value prop in a category where people are willing to spend money, health and fitness and self-improvement and things like that, you can bootstrap via ads, not just organic TikTok and other stuff like that. So there's just so many ways to get attention and thinking about viral loops. Is there a sharing moment in the app that, and I've done this in apps in the past, like earlier weather apps. I've done 2 different weather apps now, and I've been working on weather apps for 12 years. One of these days I'll crack it. But one of the early ones, I had a sharing button and it shared a GIF of the radar animation. I thought, oh, this is so cool. People are going to be sharing the animated radar of a storm coming in. And I'm total weather nerd. So I think it's so cool to look at the radar pattern of the storm coming in and covering me with the strong red rain and everything. And nobody shared. Like over the course of years with tens of thousands of users, maybe it was shared less than 100 times. And that was a big feature that we had to put in. So I'm glad I did it though, because you learn, right? So you should find ways to do stuff like that. But it's often not the kind of panacea that you hope it would be. But for some apps, if you need to invite your friends, and by inviting your friends, it does make it more valuable and you can create this sharing moment in onboarding. That's a way to kind of leverage a little bit of attention into a lot of attention. But it's gotta be something that people really care about first to just even download the app, but then second to bother even sharing it with a friend. But yeah, there's so many ways to get attention. On the podcast, we've talked about so many different marketing stunts. I was even talking to Photo Room recently. They're a much bigger app and said that they have the money to try stuff like this, but they're doing in-person stuff now where they've set up a photo booth in a popular shopping area of London. And people got to experience the app. And then what was cool about their strategy there was like, they leveraged all of this in-person stuff where people got to photo room, does photo editing and background removal and things like that. And for people to go into this photo booth, take a quick picture of themselves and then show them as if they're at the pyramids or something like that. I don't know exactly what they were doing, but there is this really aha moment of, wow, that looks really good. And oh, wow, I didn't know. We're also plugged in the app industry that we know these things are possible, but a lot of people don't even realize these things are possible. And so they took those like surprise moments and created ads and created organic engagement based on it. So yeah, there's just so many ways to get attention, but if you're building an app, you need to be thinking about how you're going to get attention for it. And if you can't, if there's not a clear way that you're going to get attention for it, say move on to another idea, like keep iterating on ideas until you find something of like, okay, it's like distribution product fit, not product market fit. Can you build something valuable that people care about that you can actually get attention? And I would say those are the 3 things that you really need to build an app that's actually going to make any money at all.
Very cool. Very cool. There is so much I want to take notes on, and I'll certainly revisit this conversation afterward. But I think what really stood out to me was how you're thinking about product as a hook. How do you make the product itself shareable? And conceptually, I and my team and a lot of folks who work in growth talk about hooks for videos, hooks for ads. But I think this is the first time I've heard of somebody talk about what's the hook in the product, what can hopefully have the product actually be shareable. And I think that's such a great framing. It's certainly something that I want to think about as quite a bit. Yeah. And to switch gears in that, we've talked about a lot of things with AI. Also mentioned in preparation for this call that you've been testing RevenueCat's Intelligence Copilot. So talk to me about the experience of testing that. Also contrast that with your vibe coding experience. Talk to me about what it's been like.
Yeah, Rika, RevenueCat Intelligence Copilot. I'll be honest, when our CEO is the one who really got excited about this, Jacob, when he first proposed the idea and started tinkering with it, I think he had set up an open claw and was like figuring out like, where do we go as a company with AI and what can we build that's really useful? And so when he first started talking about it in our Slack, I was skeptical. And I was skeptical because from what I've seen over and over again, hallucinations, other issues with AI make me very nervous for it to do anything analytical with data. But as they started building the product and I started using the product, I started to get more and more excited. And I think this comes down to how they built it. And I guess I should start by just saying what it is. Rico is a tool currently that lives in Slack as just a Slack bot, but we'll eventually bring it to the dashboard, the app, and build it across all the product surfaces inside RevenueCat. But it's a way to talk to your business. Basically, it's really the best way to frame it is that it's not just talking to your data, it's talking to your business. And the things that are most powerful with it right now are asking it things that would otherwise take a lot of work and thought to surface in our dashboards. What's going on with this specific cohort? How is my trial start rate trending? And how does that compare to benchmarks? And it gives really good suggestions of like how to improve things because we've trained it on, all the sub club episodes, all the blog posts that we've done with all sorts of contributors. And it's surprisingly smart about not just getting you the data, but then giving you ideas about how to improve your performance versus the benchmark. It also has all this data and apps data in there. So I think why it's working and why I've been so impressed with it is that the team has done a lot of really thoughtful work around it. And this is what I was talking about earlier with harness engineering is that, if you just dump a bunch of data into ChatGPT or Cowork, that's where you're more likely to get hallucinations, it not fully understand the data, not be able to give you meaningful responses. But what the team has done is, and what harness engineering is essentially, is the combination of the AI is the kind of brains, but then you need to give it tools and context. And what we've done is expose all the internal RevenueCat APIs to it. And in building this, we've ended up opening up way more APIs than we had previously because we want it to do more and more. And so for it to do more and more, we have to expose those APIs to it. So the harness engineering is defining the tooling that it can use. So here's the data, here's what the data means. We have all sorts of specs around the dashboard of why the data is the way it is, the structure of the data, the way it relates to each other. It's like we have all of that context internally and can give that to the agent and say, this is a tool to get data. This is a tool to look at benchmarks. This is a tool to understand this, and then give it context with a system prompt of how to do it. And then right now, there's 2 buttons, good slop and bad slop, for every single response, where you can say bad slop. And I've done this in my testing where it got something wrong or was a little fuzzy. And then I give very specific feedback, and the team takes that feedback and figures out like what went wrong here. Is it that the tool didn't give enough context around the data? They confused the AI, what was going on, and then what's the additional context, what's the guardrails, what can we figure out? And so this has been an iterative process with internal testing, and now we have a bunch of people on the beta using it, where we're hardening the system against the kind of common pitfalls, and it's gotten shocking. Like, I genuinely didn't expect it to be as good as it is. Every time I go double check the data, it's spot on. I was so worried about hallucinations that every time I've used it, I go check the data, and they've just set up really good safeguards. So it's like, if you do it intelligently and do QA passes and verify and checks and balances and all those kinds of things, it can get really good. And so that's what we're working on. And yeah, it's super exciting to be able to chat with your business. And how is this experiment going? Because we have the paywalls and experiments and like all these product surfaces now that it can talk to. And so you can ask it, like, how's this experiment performing? Do statistical significance calculations for you, and do things like we haven't even implemented into the dashboard yet, because it's so much work to build it out into the dashboard. And so now it's filling out the product surfaces in a way that's hard for us to do. We're going to continue doing it and adding things into the dashboard and other parts of the product. But this is able to like just do so much more. So you ask it like, how's my experiment going? I've seen some internal threads where so smart about it, and there was one time when I thought it was wrong about something, and I realized my intuition was off. So as much as I worry about hallucination, like, humans make data analysis mistakes all the time. And I'm getting to the point where I trust Rico better than my own intuition, because it's been hardened by people at the company much smarter than me, who understand the data and the relations way better than I do. And so it's really good at being able to pull out those nuances of, hey, you're not at statistical significance yet, but this one looks like it's going to win. Here's why. It's looking into the future of, here's what the conversions are likely to be based on the current data. If we extrapolate that out, and you would have to take our experiments data into a spreadsheet and do extrapolations and things like that, because we don't do some of that by default. And instead, you just ask Rico and it does it for you. So it's super cool. And then it's like, it'll give recommendations. You might think about rolling this out because it does seem like it's going to win. If this wins, you should try this experiment next. And yeah, it's really fun, really great stuff, a really fun use of AI. And then I can see us getting to a place, and the tooling getting to a place where I don't think soon we'll like fully automate it, where you just give it an app and say, make me more money, and it just figures out what to do. But like, we're heading to a place where Rika is going to suggest, hey, I think you should experiment with a new CTA on your paywall. I was just listening to the Subclub podcast where Duolingo said, try for $0.00 outperformed try for free. And then it generates the paywall, it sets up the test, and then all you do is verify, and the human QA makes sure that the paywalls look right and that it's representing your brand and didn't mess up the colors or anything like that. And then you just hit a button like start test. And then, and again, maybe soon, it'll send you an email. Hey, the test is winning, like roll it out. And it'll do the analysis proactively for you, versus, I was going to say, you go back in a few days and ask Rico how it's performing, but I think we're going to get to a place where it's proactively going to tell you how it's performing and make suggestions based on that. So it's pretty exciting in the app world right now to leverage these tools so powerfully to help make those decisions, to analyze data, to just be able to think about your business.
That sounds so exciting. Remind me, this is not yet out publicly. Is that correct, Rico?
It's in a public beta, so people can request access to it.
Okay, and that would be from the RevenueCat dashboards. They could request access.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent.
Don't know that we have a button in the dashboard yet to request access. Probably by the time this goes live, we'll be rolling it out a little more broadly. It'll either be an email that goes out or...
Yeah, I don't recollect having seen it. I would be very interested to check it out on a number of accounts we're looking at. But overall, I can see why it is so exciting, because this is an order of magnitude better than vanilla GPT or vanilla Claude, because it has the context of your business. And from what I can see and tell, a lot of that power comes from you guys giving it tools to access specific knowledge that's specific to your business, which was pretty much impossible unless you built a ton of connective tissue manually. And now it's just so easy to build those connections. I've seen some of that in our own business, because we have a project management system and a team time tracking and a lot of documentation feed into Claude Code. And it's just incredible how much more we can do as a result of this. So I can certainly understand how incredible it can be to have a tool like Rico.
And part of what's so exciting to me about it is that these days, again, as we've been talking about with vibe coding, like any one app could build versions of this internally. But with RevenueCat, because we're doing it across so many different apps with so many different people using it, we can harden it and and build it in a way more sophisticated way than you're going to be able to do internally. And so it's just exciting. And this is how I've always felt about RevenueCat since I joined. It's my little weather app that's making a few grand a month has more powerful infrastructure than some of the biggest apps in the world. I get access to this tooling with experiments and remote config paywalls and customer center and all this kind of stuff that some of the biggest apps in the world don't even have that level of sophistication in their backend system. And I get it for my $2,000 weather app. So it's kind of fun with Rico that I could probably vibe code a little bit of this if I weren't using RevenueCat, but now I don't have to do anything. I just get it. And I know that, and I can see my teammates hardening it, and I see all the people using it and know that it's going to be the best possible tool for that.
Indeed, we all live in interesting times. It's an exciting time to build. David, this has been incredible. And much like the last time we spoke, there's just so much I learned, and there's so much that I wanted to use, just the way you framed what's changing, but also how you look at the product as a hook. There's just so much I want to go back to, but this is perhaps a good time for us to wrap. Before we do that, could you tell folks how they can find out more about you and everything you do? And we will, of course, put links to all of this in the show notes.
Sure. Sometimes I think I should just embrace my growth advocate role and be like the app growth guy on Twitter. I tweet all sorts of random stuff. So I don't know if that's the best place to follow me. LinkedIn, I'm so hit or miss. I don't really enjoy spending a lot of time on stations. And so I don't end up posting as much as I should. But connect with me on LinkedIn, find me on Twitter. But really the best way to stay up on things is the Sub Club podcast and the Sub Club Live. So we've been doing almost weekly live episodes now where for years, I'd had people say, I was listening to this episode in the car and I just so wanted to ask this question. And so I'm bringing experts on to Sub Club Live where you can ask questions in the comments. And so we're doing live Q&As and topical things. And so I'm trying to make the live on YouTube way more interactive and benefit to the community on top of what I'm doing on the podcast. So follow the podcast, follow us on YouTube. And then we also have the Sub Club newsletter that you can sign up for that kind of encapsulates everything going on in the Sub Club world. So we'll share links to past live episodes. We'll share the calendar of what's coming up and then share really insightful tips. My colleague, Peter, actually does a lot of the work on that. And one of the things I love that he does every 2 weeks is he leads the episode with 3 recommended tests based on content from the episode. If all you do is look at that, it says like when I mentioned earlier, the Duolingo podcast episode that I did with their chief product officer, when he said in the podcast, we tried try for $0.00 and it outperformed try for free. So my colleague Peter put that as, hey, try testing that as your CTA. And so it's really cool. He isolates 3 different things to test in the newsletter. So it's super valuable. And then we share what's going on with YouTube and other things in there. Those are probably the best ways to stay in touch.
Yeah. So many places to link to. We will link to all of them. Yeah. Excellent, David. This is a great place for us to wrap. Thank you so much for your time. And I know you are on the verge of traveling out. So thank you for making time in your very busy schedule as well.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun chatting through all this.